The scream that shattered the silence at Millbrook Manor on November 17, 2012, would haunt everyone who heard it. Isadora Thornfield had just found her new husband lying in a pool of blood on their honeymoon suite floor. Her wedding dress, still perfect from the ceremony hours before, was now stained crimson. But here's the thing that makes this case so disturbing. The killer was standing right there in the doorway, watching, waiting. "I saved your life," the woman whispered to the sobbing bride. Those 4 words would destroy 3 families forever. Because the person who murdered Lysander Blackwood on his wedding night wasn't a stranger, wasn't a robbery gone wrong, wasn't a jealous ex-lover. It was someone who claimed to love Isadora more than life itself. Detective Montenegro had seen a lot in his career, but this? A bride cradling her dead husband while her own mother stood there with blood on her hands? This was different. The question everyone wanted answered was simple. Why? What could drive someone to commit murder on what should have been the happiest night of a young woman's life? What secret was worth destroying a family over? And why did a mother believe killing her daughter's husband was an act of love? The answers would reveal a web of lies, manipulation, and a love so possessive it became deadly. It started 3 months earlier with something as innocent as a song, something as simple as a daughter falling in love. But the man she chose? He had a secret that would change everything. But before we continue with how this nightmare began, click that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be part of this community when the shocking truth comes out. Those who don't subscribe, they're the ones asking in the comments what they missed. This is the story of how protection became possession, how a mother's fierce devotion turned lethal, and how one wedding night became a nightmare that would haunt Millbrook forever. Tuesday, August 28, 2012. The conversation that would set everything in motion happened at exactly 11:47 p.m. in the Thornfield kitchen. Marcella had been waiting up, sitting in the dark, watching the clock tick past Isadora's usual bedtime. Her daughter had been coming home later and later, always with excuses about extra work at the marine lab or impromptu dinners with colleagues. But tonight was different. Tonight, Isadora walked through that front door practically glowing, humming that same French song under her breath. And Marcella knew. She just knew. "We need to talk," she said from the shadows, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Isadora jumped, dropping her keys with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo forever in the quiet house. "Mom, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark?" But Marcella was already standing, moving toward her daughter with the deliberate steps of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. "How long have you been seeing him?" The color drained from Isadora's face so quickly it was visible even in the dim light filtering through the kitchen window. She opened her mouth, closed it, then sank into the chair across from where her mother had been waiting. "I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, Isadora Marie Thornfield. I raised you better than that." The use of her full name hit like a physical blow. Marcella only pulled out the middle name when she was truly angry, and Isadora could count on one hand the number of times she'd heard it in her 24 years of life. "Fine," Isadora whispered, her voice barely audible. 3 months. I've been seeing someone for 3 months. Someone. Marcella's laugh was bitter, cold. Someone doesn't make you come home at midnight humming love songs. Someone doesn't make you glow like you're lit from within. Who is he? And why have you been lying to me about him? The questions hung in the air between them like accusations. And for a moment, neither woman spoke. Outside, a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces before disappearing again into the night. "His name is Lysander," Isadora finally said, and even speaking his name aloud seemed to give her strength. "Lysander Blackwood. He's the new director at the Maritime Museum." "Age." The word came out sharp, clipped. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Isadora looked down at her hands, twisting the small silver ring on her right finger that Marcella had never seen before. "He's 44. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcella felt something inside her chest constrict, like someone had wrapped their hands around her heart and squeezed. 44. 20 years older than her baby girl. Old enough to have been her teacher when she was in elementary school. Old enough to know better. Old enough to manipulate a young woman who had never experienced real heartbreak, who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. "Isadora," she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to stay calm. "Do you understand what you're telling me? This man is old enough to be your father. Age is just a number when you love someone. The words hit Marcella like a slap. Love. Her daughter thought she was in love with a man twice her age, a man who had undoubtedly targeted her precisely because of her youth, her inexperience, her trusting nature. Love. Marcella's voice cracked on the word. Sweetheart, you're 24 years old. You've barely lived. You don't know the difference between love and manipulation. Don't patronize me. The fire in Isadora's eyes was something new, something Marcella had never seen before. I'm not a child. I know what I feel. Then explain it to me. Explain how a man in his 40s just happened to fall for someone young enough to be his daughter. Explain how this isn't exactly what predators do. They find vulnerable young women and convince them it's love. Isadora stood up, so abruptly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. He's not a predator. He's kind and intelligent, and he makes me laugh. He's been through pain, real pain, and he understands what it's like to lose someone you love. What pain? What loss? But even as Marcella asked the question, she felt a chill run down her spine. A man his age with a tragic backstory? It was textbook manipulation. His wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. He nursed her through 2 years of treatment before she passed away. The words came out in a rush, like Isadora had been waiting to defend him. He knows what real commitment looks like, what real love means. He's not some college boy who's going to disappear the moment things get difficult. Marcella felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. A widower. That made it worse, not better. Men who had been married before knew exactly how to play the role of devoted partner. They knew what women wanted to hear, how to make them feel special, chosen. Isadora, listen to me carefully. Men like that, they don't recover from losing a wife and immediately start dating someone barely out of college. There's something wrong with this picture. There's nothing wrong with it. Isadora's voice rose to a level Marcella hadn't heard since her daughter was 16 and fighting for permission to go to prom. The only thing wrong is that my own mother can't be happy for me. Happy? Marcella stood up, her own voice rising to match her daughter's. You want me to be happy that my baby is being taken advantage of by a man old enough to know better? You want me to celebrate the fact that you've been lying to me for months? I haven't been lying. I've been private. There's a difference. Is there? Because it sure feels like lying from where I'm standing. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as mother and daughter faced off across a chasm that seemed to grow wider with every word. I was going to tell you, Isadora said, her voice dropping back to barely above a whisper. I was waiting for the right time. When? When would have been the right time to tell your mother you're involved with someone inappropriate? He's not inappropriate. He's wonderful. Isadora stopped mid-sentence, her hand moving to cover something at her throat. But Marcella had already seen it. A necklace. A delicate gold chain with what looked like a small pearl pendant. Expensive. Intimate. The kind of gift a man gives when he's serious about a relationship. Oh God, Marcella breathed. How serious is this? Isadora's hand remained protectively over the necklace, but her chin lifted defiantly. We're engaged. The words hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment, Marcella forgot how to breathe. Engaged. Her daughter was engaged to a man she'd never met, never heard of, never even knew existed until this conversation. A man 20 years older with a conveniently tragic backstory and enough experience to manipulate a young woman into believing she was in love. No, Marcella said simply. No, you're not. I'm 24 years old. I don't need your permission. But you need your sanity, which you've clearly lost if you think I'm going to stand by and watch you ruin your life. Ruin my life? Isadora's laugh was sharp, bitter. I'm marrying the man I love. How is that ruining my life? Because you don't know him. Because men like that don't just happen to fall for girls like you without an agenda. Because he's going to hurt you, and when he does, I'm going to have to pick up the pieces. The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier. Isadora stared at her mother with an expression Marcella had never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something that looked almost like pity. Men like that, Isadora repeated slowly. Girls like me. You don't even know him, and you've already decided he's a monster. And me? Apparently, I'm just some naive little girl with no ability to make my own decisions. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Isadora turned toward the doorway, then paused. His name is Lysander Blackwood. He moved here from Boston after his wife died because he needed a fresh start. He's brilliant and kind and patient, and he loves me for exactly who I am. Not who he wants me to be, not who he thinks I should be, but exactly who I am right now. And I love him back." She started toward the stairs, then turned back one more time. "The wedding is in November. I hope you'll be there, but if you can't support this, I understand." And with that, she was gone, leaving Marcella standing alone in the kitchen with the sound of her daughter's footsteps disappearing up the stairs and a terrible certainty growing in her chest that she was about to lose the most important person in her world. But Lysander Blackwood had no idea who he was dealing with. Marcella had spent 8 years protecting her daughter from every possible harm, and she wasn't about to stop now. If Isadora wouldn't listen to reason, then Marcella would have to find another way. She would have to find out exactly who Lysander Blackwood really was. And if her suspicions were correct, if he was the predator she believed him to be, she would stop him, whatever it took. Wednesday, August 29th, 2012, 6:22 a.m. Marcella hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of her daughter moving around upstairs, getting ready for work as if nothing had changed. As if she hadn't just announced her engagement to a complete stranger. As if she hadn't just broken her mother's heart into 1,000 pieces. By the time Isadora left for work, Marcella had a plan. She waited until she heard her daughter's car pull out of the driveway, then reached for her phone and dialed a number she'd hoped never to use again. "Cross Investigations," came the gravelly voice on the other end. "Evander Cross speaking. Mr. Cross, this is Marcella Thornfield. You helped my business partner track down that contractor who stole from us last year." "Mrs. Thornfield, right? What can I do for you?" There was something in his voice that made Marcella's skin crawl, a hint of eagerness that suggested he was very good at finding dirt on people, which was exactly what she needed right now. "I need you to investigate someone. Thoroughly. I need to know everything about his past, his finances, his relationships, any complaints or police reports, anything that might suggest he's not who he appears to be." Sounds like a cheating husband situation. It's more complicated than that. The man's name is Lysander Blackwood, and he's involved with my daughter. I need to know if he's dangerous. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Marcella could almost hear the dollar signs calculating in Evander Cross's head. "How deep do you want me to dig, Mrs. Thornfield? Because the deeper we go, the more expensive it gets. Deep enough to save my daughter's life." Friday, September 14th, 2012, 2:17 p.m. The coffee shop on Federal Hill was nearly empty when Evander Cross slid a manila envelope across the scratched wooden table toward Marcella. His smile was the kind that made decent people want to take a shower afterward, but Marcella was too desperate to care about his character flaws. "Your daughter's got terrible taste in men, Mrs. Thornfield," he said, tapping the envelope with one yellowed fingernail. "This Blackwood character? He's bad news wrapped up in a pretty package." Marcella's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. 2 weeks of waiting, 2 weeks of watching her daughter float through the house like she was walking on clouds, 2 weeks of pretending to support a relationship that made her physically ill every time she thought about it. "What did you find? Open it and see for yourself." The first document was a police report from Boston, dated March 15, 2009. Marcella had to read it twice before the words sank in. Domestic disturbance call. Lysander Blackwood, 41, and Sarah Blackwood, 26. Neighbors reported shouting, possible physical altercation. No charges filed after Mrs. Blackwood refused to cooperate with officers. The second document was a medical report. Emergency room visit, Sarah Blackwood, March 16, 2009. Contusions consistent with being grabbed forcefully. Bruising on upper arms. Patient claimed she fell downstairs. His wife, Marcella whispered, her voice barely audible. She was young too. 26 when they married. Cross confirmed, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign on the wall. Same pattern as your daughter. Young, vulnerable, isolated from family. The next document was a death certificate, but not the one Marcella expected. Sarah Blackwood had indeed died of cancer, but there was an attached report from a social worker who had visited during her final weeks. Patient expressed fear of husband. Mentioned controlling behavior, financial manipulation. Requested information about women's shelters, but died before follow-up visit could be arranged. Jesus, Marcella breathed. The final document was the worst. A statement from Sarah's sister, given to police after the funeral but never officially filed. She believed her sister had been slowly poisoned. Sarah had been getting sicker faster than her doctors expected. The sister suspected Lysander was giving her something to speed up the cancer's progression, but she had no proof. Just suspicions and a dying woman's whispered fears. This could be anyone, Marcella said, but her voice lacked conviction. The documents looked official, stamped and signed, complete with case numbers and official letterheads. Your call, lady. But if it was my daughter, I'd want to know what kind of man she was planning to marry. Cross stubbed out his cigarette and stood up. My bill's in there too. And Mrs. Thornfield? I'd be careful how you handle this information. Men like Blackwood don't like being exposed. Marcella sat alone in that coffee shop for another hour, reading through the documents over and over again. Each page confirmed her worst fears. Lysander Blackwood wasn't just inappropriate for her daughter. He was dangerous, deadly, and Isadora had no idea what she'd gotten herself into. What Marcella couldn't have known was that every single document in that envelope was a lie. Evander Cross specialized in creating exactly the kind of evidence desperate clients wanted to see. For the right price, he could make anyone look like a monster. The police reports were printed on stolen letterhead. The medical records were fabricated. The social worker's notes were typed on a computer in his basement office. Even the death certificate, while Sarah Blackwood had indeed died of cancer, had been altered to include the fictional social worker's report. Cross had spent 2 weeks crafting a story he knew would send a protective mother over the edge. He'd seen it before. Women so desperate to save their daughters from perceived threats that they'd pay premium prices for ammunition to use against the men they feared. The fact that Sarah Blackwood had actually died of cancer made the lie easier to sell. All Cross had to do was twist the truth just enough to make an innocent man look like a killer. But Marcella believed every word. How could she not? Here was proof, in black and white, that her instincts had been correct. Her daughter was engaged to a man who had already killed one young wife and was planning to do it again. Tuesday, October 9th, 2012, 7:30 p.m. Marcella cornered Isadora in the laundry room, where her daughter was carefully steaming wrinkles out of her wedding dress. The sight of that white silk, hanging there like a funeral shroud, made Marcella's stomach clench with dread. "We need to talk about your fiancé," she said, holding the manila envelope behind her back. Isadora didn't look up from her steaming. "If you're going to try to talk me out of marrying him again, save your breath. The invitations are already sent. What if I told you I had proof he's not who you think he is?" Now Isadora looked up, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and annoyance. "What kind of proof?" Marcella pulled out the first police report and held it toward her daughter. Proof that he hurt his first wife. Proof that she was afraid of him when she died. Isadora took the document, read it once, then looked back at her mother with something that might have been disappointment. "You hired someone to dig up dirt on my fiancé. I hired someone to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. This is fake." The certainty in Isadora's voice caught Marcella off guard. "Look at it. Really look at it. The case number doesn't match the format Boston PD uses. The officer's name is misspelled on the signature line. And the date? March 15th, 2009. That's the day we buried Dad, Mom. I was with Lysander that entire day. We met at the grief counseling group, remember? The one you insisted I attend." Marcella stared at the document in her daughter's hands, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. "That's impossible," the investigator said. "The investigator lied to you because you paid him to find something wrong with Lysander." Isadora handed the report back to her mother. "Sarah died of cancer, Mom. I was there during her final weeks. I held Lysander's hand at her funeral. I watched him grieve for a woman he loved more than his own life." The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. But the medical reports, the social worker's notes, are all fake. And you know what the saddest part is? You wanted them to be real. You wanted Lysander to be a monster so badly that you paid someone to make him into one. Isadora turned back to her wedding dress, but her hands were shaking now. "I'm marrying him in 5 weeks, Mom. You can either support that decision, or you can keep fighting me on it. But I'm done pretending your fears are more important than my happiness." The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of forced politeness and underlying tension. Marcella continued to insist the documents were real, while Isadora moved forward with wedding plans as if her mother had never presented them. The house became a battleground where every conversation about flowers or music or seating arrangements carried the weight of their fundamental disagreement about Lysander's character. October 30th, 2012. Millbrook Manor. The wedding venue looked like something out of a fairy tale, with white roses climbing the stone walls and thousands of tiny lights strung through the bare branches of the oak trees. Marcella stood in the main ballroom, watching the wedding planner direct workers as they set up tables and chairs, and felt like she was watching preparations for her daughter's execution. Mrs. Thornfield? The voice belonged to Lysander himself, appearing beside her with that quiet grace that had probably charmed her daughter right out of her common sense. Could I have a word? He looked tired, older than his 44 years, with lines around his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping about as well as Marcella had lately. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Actually, I think we do. He gestured toward a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the workers and their noise. I know you think I'm wrong for Isadora. I know you have concerns about our age difference. And I know someone gave you information that made you believe I'm dangerous. Marcella's heart rate spiked. What do you know about that? I know that whatever you were told about Sarah's death isn't true. I know you love your daughter enough to hire someone to investigate me. And I know you're scared. His voice was gentle, understanding, which somehow made everything worse. I'm not scared. I'm protecting my child. From what? From being loved? From having someone who would do anything to make her happy. He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. Mrs. Thornfield, I lost the love of my life 3 years ago. I never expected to feel that way about someone again. Your daughter brought light back into a world that had been dark for so long. The last thing I would ever do is hurt her. You already are hurting her. Just by being with her, you're limiting her options, her future, her chance to find someone appropriate. Appropriate. The words seemed to hang in the air between them. You mean someone younger? Someone who hasn't lived enough to know what real love looks like. Someone who hasn't already buried one wife under suspicious circumstances. The accusation came out harder than Marcella had intended, and she saw him flinch as if she'd slapped him. Is that what you think? That I killed Sarah? His voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear him. I have documentation. You have lies someone sold you because they knew you'd pay for them. He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw not guilt or anger, but something much worse. Pity. Mrs. Thornfield, I held Sarah's hand while she died. I slept in a chair next to her hospital bed for the last 6 months of her life. I watched cancer eat away at the most beautiful person I'd ever known, and I would have given anything, my life, my soul, everything I had, to trade places with her. The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable, and for a moment, Marcella felt her certainty waver. But then she remembered the documents, the official letterheads, the detailed reports of abuse and control. Anyone can fake grief. And anyone can fake evidence, Mrs. Thornfield. The question is, why are you so determined to believe the worst about me? The question hit her like a physical blow. Why was she so determined to see him as a threat? Because he was older? Because he'd found love with her daughter? Because every instinct she had screamed that this relationship was wrong, inappropriate, dangerous? Because I know men like you, she said finally. And I know what you do to young women who are naive enough to trust you. Something shifted in his expression then, the gentleness replaced by something harder, more resolved. Then there's nothing more to say, is there? You've already decided who I am, regardless of the truth. He started to walk away, then turned back one final time. But let me ask you this, Mrs. Thornfield. When your daughter realizes what you've done to try to destroy her happiness, when she understands that you've been willing to believe lies rather than see her truly happy, what do you think that's going to do to your relationship with her? The words followed Marcella home and echoed in her head all night. Because underneath his question was a terrible truth she'd been trying not to acknowledge. She was losing her daughter either way. If Lysander was the monster she believed him to be, Isadora would eventually be hurt, possibly killed. If he wasn't, if the documents were fake, if her fears were unfounded, then she was destroying her relationship with her daughter for nothing. But by then, it was too late to stop what she'd already put in motion. The wedding was 2 weeks away. The invitations had been sent, the venue booked, the dress fitted. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a plan was already forming. A way to end this once and for all, to save her daughter from a fate that might be real or might be the product of her own paranoid imagination. Either way, Marcella had decided it was a risk she couldn't take. Because sometimes, when you love someone more than life itself, you have to be willing to do terrible things to protect them, even if it means losing them forever. Saturday, November 17th, 2012. 3:30 p.m., Millbrook Manor had been transformed into something magical. White roses cascaded down the stone walls like frozen waterfalls, and thousands of tiny lights twinkled in the bare oak branches overhead. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the historic ballroom, casting everything in a golden glow that made the whole scene look like something from a dream. Guests began arriving at exactly 3:30, their voices mixing with the soft sound of a string quartet playing near the altar. Marcella stood at the back of the room in her navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress, watching people she'd known for decades file into the white wooden chairs. Her neighbor Mrs. Rothwell, who had helped with Isadora's science fair projects in middle school. Dr. Martinez from the Marine Lab, where Isadora worked, beaming with pride for his favorite researcher. College friends who had driven up from New York City just to see their brilliant, beautiful friend marry the man of her dreams. They all looked so happy, so excited to witness what they believed would be the beginning of a beautiful love story. None of them had any idea they were actually attending what would become the most infamous wedding in Millbrook's history. "Mrs. Thornfield, you look lovely." The voice belonged to Detective Thaddeus Montenegro, who had attended the same church as the Thornfield family for 20 years. He was here as a guest, not knowing that within hours he would be investigating the most disturbing crime scene of his career. "Thank you, Thaddeus. I'm glad you could make it." The words felt like sandpaper in her throat. In her purse was a small pharmacy bottle filled with pills she'd been collecting for weeks. Sleeping pills from her doctor, pain medication left over from her dental work, anything that might help her get through what was coming next. Because Marcella had made her decision. If she couldn't save her daughter from this marriage, she would save her from the inevitable abuse and possibly murder that would follow. The plan was simple. During the reception, while everyone was celebrating, she would slip away to Lysander's hotel room. She had convinced the manager to give her access by claiming she was surprising the newlyweds with a special wedding gift. She would be waiting when Lysander came upstairs, and then she would end this nightmare before it could truly begin. For 15 p.m., the music changed, and everyone stood as the bridal party began their procession down the aisle. First came Cordelia Ashworth, Isadora's maid of honor, practically glowing with happiness for her best friend. Then two of Lysander's colleagues from the Maritime Museum, looking distinguished in their matching gray tuxedos. The wedding party was small, intimate, exactly what Isadora had always said she wanted. When the music swelled into the wedding march, every head turned toward the back of the room. And there she was. Isadora Thornfield looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale. Her grandmother's lace wedding dress had been perfectly restored, the intricate beadwork catching the light with every step. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, held in place by the pearl comb her father had given her mother on their own wedding day 26 years earlier. But it was her face that took everyone's breath away. She was radiant in a way that transcended mere physical beauty. This was a woman who had found her place in the world, who was walking toward her future with absolute confidence and joy. As she passed her mother, Isadora reached out and squeezed Marcella's hand, a gesture of love and forgiveness that made several guests tear up. "I love you, Mom," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Marcella squeezed back, her heart breaking as she realized this might be the last tender moment she would ever share with her daughter. At the altar, Lysander waited with an expression of such pure adoration that even some of the guests who had harbored doubts about the age difference found themselves smiling. When he saw Isadora walking toward him, his eyes filled with tears, and he had to wipe them away with the back of his hand. This was a man looking at his miracle, his second chance at happiness, his reason to believe in love again. The ceremony itself was perfect. Pastor Williams, who had baptized Isadora as an infant, spoke about the sacred bond of marriage with the warmth and wisdom of someone who had officiated over hundreds of weddings but still believed in their power to transform lives. "Lysander and Isadora have each experienced profound loss," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. "They understand that love is not guaranteed, that tomorrow is not promised, and that finding someone who truly understands your heart is one of life's greatest gifts. Their vows were personal, written by each of them in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Lysander spoke first, his voice steady despite his visible emotion. Isadora, 3 years ago, I thought my capacity for love had been buried with my wife. You taught me that the heart doesn't replace love, it expands it. You brought light back into my world, not by making me forget my past, but by helping me see that I could honor Sarah's memory while still embracing a future with you. You are my unexpected blessing, my second chance, my everything. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even Marcella, despite everything she believed about this man, found herself moved by the raw sincerity in his voice. Isadora's vows were equally heartfelt. Lysander, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. You've supported my dreams, challenged my mind, and shown me what it means to be truly partnered with someone. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but in the difficult ones. Not just in health, but in sickness. Not just for today, but for all the tomorrows we're blessed to share. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that followed was gentle, reverent, and filled with promise. The applause was thunderous, and as the newly married couple walked back down the aisle together, guests threw rose petals that had been placed in small baskets at the end of each row. It was, by every measure, a perfect wedding. 6:30 p.m. The reception was in full swing. The ballroom had been transformed yet again, with round tables draped in ivory linens and centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath. The band was playing jazz standards while guests mingled and shared stories about the happy couple. Lysander and Isadora moved through the crowd like they were floating, accepting congratulations and posing for countless photographs. They looked like they had been married for years rather than hours, so natural and comfortable with each other that it was impossible to miss their connection. During dinner, toasts were made. Dr. Martinez spoke about Isadora's dedication to marine conservation and how her passion for protecting the oceans had led her to find someone who shared her values. Cordelia told stories about their college years, painting a picture of a young woman who had always known exactly what she wanted and had the determination to achieve it. Lysander's best man, a colleague from his previous job in Boston, spoke about watching his friend emerge from the darkness of grief to find joy again. I've known Lysander for 15 years, he said, raising his champagne glass. I watched him love Sarah with everything he had, and I watched him nearly die with her when cancer took her away. I honestly didn't think he would ever smile again, let alone love again. Isadora, you performed a miracle. You brought my friend back to life. The crowd raised their glasses in a toast, but Marcella couldn't bring herself to drink. She sat at the head table, picking at her salmon and watching the clock on her phone. 8:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, she would excuse herself to the ladies' room and then slip away to the hotel elevators. In her purse, along with the pills, was a small crystal vase she had taken from one of the centerpieces. Heavy enough to do what needed to be done. 8:52 p.m. I'll be right back, she whispered to Mrs. Rothwell, who was seated next to her. Too much champagne. The walk to the elevator felt like it took forever. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure other guests could hear it, but everyone was focused on the band, which had just started playing The Way You Look Tonight for the couple's first dance. She watched from the elevator doors as Lysander spun Isadora around the dance floor, both of them laughing like teenagers. They looked so happy, so perfect together, that for a moment Marcella wavered. What if she was wrong? What if the documents really were fake? What if she was about to destroy the most beautiful thing in her daughter's life based on lies and paranoia? But then she remembered Sarah Blackwood, dead at 26. She remembered the police reports, the medical records, the social worker's notes about a young woman too afraid to ask for help. She couldn't take the chance. Not with Isadora's life. 9:15 p.m. The honeymoon suite on the third floor of Millbrook Manor was everything Isadora had dreamed of. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, where sailboats bobbed gently in the moonlight. A bottle of champagne chilled in a silver bucket. Rose petals were scattered across the king-sized bed. It should have been the beginning of the most romantic night of a young woman's life. Instead, it became a crime scene. Marcella used the master key she had convinced the hotel manager to loan her, slipping into the room like a ghost. The crystal vase felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she positioned herself behind the door that led to the balcony. All she had to do was wait. 10:30 p.m. The sound of the key card in the lock made Marcella's entire body tense. But it was Lysander alone who entered the suite, still wearing his tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked tired but content, moving with the easy grace of a man who had just married the love of his life. "Isadora," he called softly, but there was no answer. She must still be downstairs, accepting congratulations and saying goodbye to guests. He walked to the balcony doors and stepped outside, breathing in the cool November air and probably thinking about his future with his new wife. This was the moment Marcella had been waiting for. She approached him quietly, the vase raised above her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Blackwood." He turned with a smile, probably expecting to see his bride. Instead, he found himself facing his mother-in-law, and the confusion on his face was immediate and complete. "Mrs. Thornfield? Is everything okay? Where's Isadora?" "She's safe now." The words came out steadier than Marcella had expected. "Safe from what? I don't understand." He took a step toward her, concern evident in his voice. "Is something wrong? Are you hurt?" His kindness, even in this moment, even when faced with a woman holding a weapon above his head, was almost unbearable. This was not the behavior of a man who had killed his first wife. This was not the response of someone with a violent nature. This was exactly how a good man would react to finding his mother-in-law in distress. "You killed Sarah," Marcella said, but even as the words left her mouth, she could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "You're going to kill Isadora too." The look of pure horror that crossed Lysander's face was not something anyone could fake. "Mrs. Thornfield, I don't know what you've been told, but Sarah died of cancer. I loved her. I would never have hurt her. The police reports, the hospital records, the social worker who said she was afraid of you. Those aren't real." His voice was gentle, patient, the voice of someone trying to talk a mentally ill person down from a ledge. "Someone lied to you. Someone sold you fake documents because they knew you were scared and desperate." The vase wavered in Marcella's hands. Because looking at this man, really looking at him, she could see the truth written across his face. This was not a killer. This was not an abuser. This was a good man who had loved one wife deeply and was now devoted to another. This was a man her daughter had chosen not because she was naive or manipulated, but because she was smart and discerning and had recognized genuine love when she found it. "It's too late," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't let her make this mistake." "What mistake?" "Loving me. Being loved in return." He took another step closer, his hands extended in a gesture of peace. "Mrs. Thornfield, I know our age difference bothers you. I know you think I'm too old for her. But I love your daughter more than I have ever loved anything in my life. I would die before I let anything hurt her. You are what's going to hurt her." But the conviction was gone from her voice now, replaced by desperation and growing horror at what she was about to do. "Please, just leave her alone. Just disappear and let her find someone appropriate." "I can't do that." The simple honesty in his voice was devastating. "I love her too much to walk away, and she loves me too much to let me go." That's when Marcella knew, with absolute certainty, that she was about to murder an innocent man. The documents were fake. The investigation was a lie. Everything she had believed about Lysander Blackwood was the product of her own fear and a con artist who had fed those fears for money. But she was too far gone to stop, too committed to the idea that she was saving her daughter to admit that she was actually destroying her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and brought the vase down with all her strength. The sound it made connecting with his skull was horrible, wet, and final. Lysander dropped immediately, blood spreading across the white marble of the balcony floor in an ever-widening pool. Marcella stood over him, the broken crystal still in her hands, waiting for him to move, waiting for him to get up and call for help or try to stop her. But he didn't move. His eyes stared sightlessly at the November sky, and his chest was completely still. She had killed him. She had murdered her daughter's husband on their wedding night based on lies and her own paranoid delusions. 10:47 p.m. Isadora's laughter could be heard echoing down the hotel corridor as she said goodbye to the last of the wedding guests. Her voice was bright and happy, full of excitement about the life she was about to begin with the man she loved. She had no idea that man was already dead. She used her key card to enter the suite, calling out playfully, "Lysander, I hope you're ready for me because I am officially Mrs. Blackwood and I plan to celebrate appropriately." The silence that greeted her was the first sign that something was wrong. "Lysander?" She stepped further into the room, noticing that the balcony doors were open and the curtains were moving in the night breeze. "Are you out there?" When she reached the balcony doorway, the scene that greeted her was something no human mind is equipped to process. Her husband of 6 hours lay motionless on the marble floor, his silver hair matted with blood. Kneeling beside him was her mother, still wearing her navy blue mother of the bride dress, now stained with crimson. The scream that tore from Isadora's throat could probably be heard all the way down to the harbor. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of a life being torn apart, of a future being murdered along with the man she had planned to spend it with. "No, no, no, no," she chanted, dropping to her knees beside Lysander's body and gathering his head into her lap. "Please don't leave me. Please. We just got married. We just started our life together." His skin was already growing cold. His eyes, which had looked at her with such love just hours before, stared at nothing. Her wedding dress, the same dress her grandmother had worn on the happiest day of her life, was now soaked with her husband's blood. "Mom," she whispered, looking up at Marcella with an expression of such profound betrayal that it was almost unbearable to witness. "What did you do?" "I saved your life." Marcella's voice was completely flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. "He was going to hurt you. I had proof." "Proof?" Isadora's voice cracked on the word. "What proof?" "The investigation. The police reports. His first wife was my friend." The words came out as a shriek. "Sarah was my friend, you psychotic bitch. She introduced us at the grief counseling group after Dad died. She told me before she passed away that if anything ever happened to her, I should take care of Lysander because he was the best man she'd ever known." The truth hit Marcella like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't been murdered. She hadn't been abused. She had been loved, cherished, cared for by a man who was now dead because of fabricated evidence and a mother's paranoid delusions. "Isadora, I thought." "You thought what? That you knew better than me? That you could decide who I love? That you had the right to murder my husband because you didn't approve of our age difference?" Isadora was screaming now, her voice raw with grief and rage. "You killed the only man I've ever loved because you couldn't stand the idea of me being happy with someone other than you." 11:02 p.m. The police arrived in response to noise complaints from other hotel guests. Detective Montenegro, still in his wedding guest attire, was the first officer on the scene. What he found in that honeymoon suite would haunt him for the rest of his career. A young bride covered in blood, cradling her dead husband while her mother stood nearby in a complete catatonic state. The crystal vase, still bearing traces of blood and hair, lay shattered on the marble floor. The rose petals that had been scattered romantically across the bed were now mixed with drops of blood that had been tracked in from the balcony. "Mrs. Thornfield," Montenegro said gently, approaching Marcella with the caution of someone dealing with a mentally unstable person. "I need you to tell me what happened here." Marcella looked at him with empty eyes. "I saved my daughter's life," she repeated, like it was the only sentence she remembered. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the weapon and put your hands where I can see them." She complied without resistance, moving like a sleepwalker while other officers secured the scene and called for the medical examiner. Isadora refused to let go of Lysander's body, clinging to him even as paramedics gently tried to explain that there was nothing they could do. "He was going to show me the sunrise," she sobbed. "We were going to watch the sunrise together from this balcony. It was going to be our first morning as husband and wife. Only my subscribers will see how this mother's evidence was created and why innocent people die when we believe what we want to believe. Everyone else, they'll just have to wonder how someone could be so easily manipulated. Don't be everyone else." The arrest was almost anticlimactic. Marcella offered no resistance, no explanation beyond her repeated claim that she had saved her daughter's life. She was still wearing her corsage, the white roses now wilted and stained with blood, when they put the handcuffs on her wrists. As they led her away, she looked back one final time at her daughter, who was still holding her dead husband and whispering apologies to his lifeless form. It was the last time mother and daughter would see each other for 4 years. Sunday, November 18th, 2012, 6:45 a.m., Detective Montenegro sat across from Evander Cross in the police station interview room. Cross looked exactly like what he was, a bottom feeder who made his living off other people's desperation. "Mr. Cross, I need you to walk me through exactly what you provided to Marcella Thornfield," Montenegro said, sliding the fabricated police report across the table. Cross barely glanced at it. "Looks like a standard background check to me." Standard background checks don't include police reports that were never filed. They don't include medical records from hospitals that have no record of treating the supposed victim. And they sure as hell don't include social worker notes typed on a computer we've traced back to your office. The color drained from Cross's face. "Here's what happened," Montenegro continued. "Marcella Thornfield came to you desperate to find dirt on her daughter's fiancé. You couldn't find any real dirt because Lysander Blackwood was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man who'd lost his wife to cancer. So you decided to create some dirt instead." Cross shifted nervously. "You got any proof?" "We've got your computer with the fake letterheads. We've got financial records showing the $3,000 payment from Mrs. Thornfield. And we've got testimony from Sarah Blackwood's actual oncologist confirming she died of natural causes and her husband never left her side." That's when Cross broke completely. "She wanted me to find something wrong with him. She kept pushing me, offering double if I could find proof he was dangerous. I needed the money. My business was going under. So you created evidence that led directly to murder. That makes you an accessory." The investigation revealed the truth within a week. Lysander's colleagues, neighbors, Sarah's doctors, everyone painted the same picture. A devoted husband who had nursed his wife through cancer with extraordinary dedication. Dr. Elizabeth Hartley, Sarah's oncologist, was adamant. Lysander was different. He supported Sarah's choices and made sure her final months were filled with dignity. "If there were more husbands like him, my job would be easier." Sarah's sister Jennifer was equally emphatic. "Whoever told Mrs. Thornfield I suspected Lysander is lying. He was family. When Sarah got sick, he quit his job to care for her. The last thing she said was that she hoped he'd find love again because he had too much heart to spend life alone." March 4th, 2013. Marcella's trial began on a cold morning in a packed courtroom. Prosecutor Amanda Walsh laid out the case. "This is about a mother's love that became so twisted, so possessive, it drove her to murder. When Isadora chose to marry Lysander Blackwood, the defendant decided to eliminate the man her daughter had chosen." The defense focused on Marcella's mental state and the fraudulent evidence. But Isadora's testimony destroyed any sympathy for her mother. Wearing black, gaunt from months of grief, she spoke quietly. "My mother killed the best man I've ever known. She killed my husband, my future, the father of children I'll never have, because she couldn't stand me being happy with someone other than her." The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter. 15 years, parole possible after 12. February 14th, 2015. 2 years after the murder, Isadora visited her mother in prison for the first time. Marcella had aged dramatically, gray hair, 30 pounds thinner, new lines around her eyes. "I know you probably hate me," Marcella said through tears. "I do," Isadora replied simply. "Do you understand what you took from me? I've been seeing a therapist. She helped me understand how my grief twisted into something terrible. I thought I was protecting you, but I was trying to possess you. I was so afraid of losing you that I destroyed what made you happiest. You killed my husband. I killed an innocent man because I couldn't admit you'd grown up, that you'd found someone who loved you better than I ever could." For the first time, Isadora felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, but understanding. "Did you know the documents were fake?" "By the end, yes. By the night I killed him, I knew he was exactly what you said, a good man who loved you. But I was too far gone to stop." "Then why?" "Because I couldn't bear you loving someone more than me. If you're feeling sick right now realizing an innocent man died for nothing, imagine how the people who miss these stories feel when they find out weeks later through spoilers." Subscribe if you never want to be that person. April 22nd, 2018. 6 years after Lysander's murder, the Lysander Blackwood Marine Conservation Center opened in Millbrook Harbor. Isadora had poured her grief into creating something meaningful from her loss. At the opening ceremony, she addressed hundreds of people. 6 years ago, I lost my husband to senseless violence. I could have remained angry and broken forever. Instead, I chose to honor his memory by continuing our work together. This center represents hope, that even facing unimaginable loss, something beautiful can still grow. November 17th, 2024. 12 years after Lysander's murder, Marcella was released from prison. Isadora waited outside the gates. They drove to Lysander's grave together. Marcella knelt beside the headstone, placing white roses next to Isadora's weekly bouquet. I'm sorry I took you away from her. I'm sorry I robbed you of all the years you should have had together. I hope someday you can forgive me. What happens now? Marcella asked. Now we figure out how to be a family again, Isadora answered. It won't be easy, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try. Today, Marcella works at a domestic violence shelter, helping women understand the difference between protective love and possessive control. She and Isadora have dinner once a week, slowly rebuilding their shattered relationship. The Conservation Center has become one of New England's premier educational facilities. Isadora never remarried, but found peace in her work and purpose in honoring Lysander's memory. On quiet Sunday evenings, when mother and daughter sit watching the sunset over Millbrook Harbor, there's something that looks almost like peace between them. Not their old closeness, but something deeper and more honest. Love tested by fire and somehow survived. The story serves as a reminder that love without boundaries can become violence. But it also shows that even the most damaged relationships can heal if both people choose forgiveness over hatred, growth over bitterness, and hope over despair. Even in our darkest moments, redemption remains possible. We just have to be brave enough to reach for it.